Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming in today. First and foremost, really appreciate the invite here. It's the first time I'm here at FinTech DEF CON. Actually, a lot of first times. First time in Austin, first time in the state of Texas. That being said, when I was invited down here, was very excited about the weather, but I come from all the way from north from Canada, and let's just say that it was excessive, and I think I'll stop complaining about the cold weather for probably the next decade or so. But that being said, today we're going to be talking about the AI-driven AML independent assessment tool, or how to conduct AML independent assessments with the assistance of AI. The speakers today were supposed to be Jasser and Dawa. The heat got to him, so apologies about that. He won't be making it in today, but myself, my name is Karapetyan. I'm a senior associate at StrategyBrix. StrategyBrix is a boutique compliance and risk-focused consulting firm, and primarily we work with fintechs, cryptocurrency businesses, and also partner banks. A little bit about myself. I have about 3 years of regulatory compliance experience, about another 3 years in technology consulting experience, and overall, prior to that, I was a developer, like probably many of you here. Actually, how many of you are developers? Let me just, oh, okay. We have a split room to a certain degree. With that being said, I still would like to say I am still a developer, although I've transitioned to consulting, and that has always been a passion. So have been working a lot on many technologies. And at StrategyBrix, we sort of look at technology as a way of enhancing our own productivity and the efficiency of our clients' work as well. With that, we'll just get into sort of the content. We'll cover what is an AML independent assessment, for those of you who do not know, the challenges associated with conducting one, the solution, and in this case, we're looking at how AI can assist you with essentially conducting these assessments. And then we'll dive into the Q&A, and as part of the solution, we'll also talk about the architecture and essentially how the model has been designed in the case of this specific tool. Okay, so what is an AML independent assessment? An objective evaluation of organization's anti-money laundering program. It's primarily designed to ensure your compliance with the regulatory standards, identifying any weaknesses, observations, providing actionable recommendations for improvement. So who needs this? So partner banks, they maintain oversight over their fintech clients. They need to ensure that these fintech clients adhere to the regulatory standards, and they essentially assess the posture of their fintech clients through these independent assessments. And also, of course, the fintechs, as they also need to demonstrate that compliance to the AML standards, and they also have the bank oversight over them, so they need to ensure that they adhere to those standards as well. So the process of conducting an independent assessment is not complex, but it involves a lot of points of, let's just say, a lot of challenges as the process progresses. So we're looking at information collection stage as the first step. So in this stage, there is, we call this a proactive stage. There are questionnaires, client workshops being conducted in this stage, so we're proactively gathering information on what is required in order to essentially assess your compliance posture, or the health of your compliance program, if I were to say. And then we have our assessment and inference stage. This is more of a passive process. This involves gathering information, reviewing information such as policies, procedures, documents. There's a lot of review that goes in this stage, and that, I would say, by far is the most resource-intensive stage of the process. At this stage as well, the experts draw inference based on the collected information, so they would essentially address any findings in this stage, analyze, and then from there, they'll prepare a template of a report, which further is reviewed by the experts, and then they finalize the review and essentially distribute the report to the appropriate entities. I'm just going to pause here. I know that this is the business portion of the challenge that we're trying to solve here, but are there any questions about this process? Okay, great. Okay, so what are the challenges? And I think understanding this would really help us to understand why we've looked at designing a tool largely for ourselves to improve our efficiency and to ensure that it also in the interim reduces the cost associated with the overall sort of the process of conducting the independent assessments. The complexity of the AML regulations is definitely there. It's an ever-changing environment, constantly evolving. We need to keep up with the regulations as they come through. The subjectivity, of course, the human bias plays a certain role. It can impact the objectivity of your assessment. Then we go into the resource intensity. That process requires significant time. There's a lot of things to review, ensure that we are adhering to the standards, to ensure that we're not missing anything. There's also expertise required to conduct these thorough reviews. And then there's consistency. So variability in assessment also is an issue. There may be a quality variability and the variability in findings, and that depends on who's conducting the assessment, largely. So these are the primary challenges that we're looking to solve through this process. What we found while trying to build this solution of using AI is we are hitting at least 3 or 4 of these challenges through the process of making the process more efficient and standardizing the process to a certain degree with the use of artificial intelligence, in this case, generative AI. Once again, any questions about the business process? If not, then what I could do is we could dive into the demo and we can talk a little bit about what that implies essentially from perspective of from the technology. Yes?
As far as the complexity goes, every jurisdiction is slightly different. I mean, similar but different.
Yeah.
How do you monitor all the changes, and then how do you implement the changes into the system in a timely manner?
Right. Right. At this stage, I would say that the complexity aspect of this is still a manual process. So we are looking at external solutions. So there's, of course, ways to monitor regulatory changes depending on the jurisdiction, specific to the client that you're working with, which jurisdictions they work in. So that process is largely manual. And I wanted to also emphasize that the tool does not replace the human element here. What it does is it enhances the human function and makes the process faster and more efficient. However, this time, yes, so the AML regulations and sort of that updates to the AML regulations is still a manual process. Any other questions about this? Okay, great. So let me switch to my see how I can share the other display here. Am I sharing anything? Probably not. 1 second. Okay. Is everyone able to see, or is it too small? A little small. Better now? Or is it just expanding? Let me see if I can. Getting better? Okay. Okay. Let me switch to the next screen. We'll see if that helps or not, but I feel like it's just minimizing the... Let me just try one more time here. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. I'm not sure if it's bright enough. Maybe this is better. People in the back there. So. I don't know if I can get any. Better? Okay. This screen will be a little bit small, I think, as we move into the next screen. It's a little bit more visible, but let me just walk you through the process of an independent assessment as we conduct it right now, and how the tool essentially handles some of that. And then we'll also look at the architecture as we move from here to sort of the next stage. First thing that I wanted to mention, this specific instance was provisioned for demo purposes, so you'd see a lot of dummy data in here. So just please bear in mind with that as you go through this. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is that we're looking at sort of staged approach. So if you have any questions as I go through it, please just stop me and let me know. I'm happy to answer how certain aspects of this work. But we will look at the specific architecture of this as we move from the demo to sort of the architecture slides. Okay. Okay, so when we start with the independent assessment, we looked at sort of the initial stage of the independent assessment, which is that the data gathering stage. We look at essentially getting the engagement information, so that would involve the company information, the primary contact, anything that we need essentially about that engagement, and then we can essentially get started here on the engagement itself. With that, here you'd be looking at essentially the information of the company, and we'll have our action center and the file upload option on the bottom here. What this allows us to do is to ensure that we have the right engagement in place, and it also separates so the information that we're collecting on that specific engagement in a more physically in a more separate sort of structure. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how we ensure that there is no sort of data poisoning and things like that, or data corruption. So as we collect the information, the very first thing that we need to do is, well, we conduct an interview or a workshop. But before that, we usually go through a process of seeing if the clients have any pre-existing policies that we can collect ahead of time, right? So, and as part of that, we've just created a very simple process. I have a sample policy here, and I'll just load this policy in. From here, as I'm loading the policy, a few things happen in the background. The policy gets uploaded, and then I'm essentially able to contextualize this policy and vectorize it. And we'll talk a little bit about that process as we get into the architecture portion. So, the next stage is that proactive stage that we talked about, and that's the interview stage. And here, it's just a matter of essentially going through the questions and asking the client for specific information. Over the years, as these independent assessments have been conducted, we've created a fairly robust asset of questions. Those are broken down into 8 pillars. For the purposes of this demo, we'll look at the oversight pillar, but you will have a range of anywhere between 20 to 50, maybe up to 60 questions, depending on the pillar. Each pillar is broken down into review items. And again, each pillar may have between 2 and upwards of 5 or 6 review items. So you can see that this is very resource intensive in the sense of going through every single question, trying to find the answer for each question. These questions are iterative. So that implies that we either collect the information via interview or workshop, or if we can find information in your policy, which is another process that we have to go through as we conduct these independent assessments. We will go ahead and fill out the information that we need, or get the information from the essentially so your static files or your policy files. When we go through the questions, and this can be yes, there is an org structure, refer to document, a PDF, right? So it can be something like this. It may not even be a full answer to a question. Sometimes this is what we get when we start on essentially collection of data. A lot of the times the answers that we get are generic, and they refer us to static files here, and I can potentially just save this and then just move on. What we found is what we could do is we can get to the interview or that proactive stage of gathering information by trying to identify the gaps of the information that we've already received. So instead of going through 700 questions with a client, we could check ahead of time to see if we have all these answers already, or if we need to go in and double check with the client on specific questions. So that initial intake happens, but it may not be as robust or as rich as the initial sort of stages would. Sorry, was there a question over there, or no? Okay. So I've loaded my information, and just to reset this view, I'm going to get into my summary, and this is essentially where we see the most benefit of using generative AI. You can see that these questions are essentially running through a fetch process. So what we're doing here is we're actually running every single one of these questions as a query against a model that we have in the backend. Those of you who are developers who are familiar with the sort of Gen AI in concept, this is your RAG application, right? So what is RAG? It's a retrieval augmented generation. In other words, it's a way for you to narrow down the context of the search query in a more simple way. When you have a general model like ChatGPT, that model is trained on internet, basically. There's an internet base that is trained on. A lot of the times when you go and ask it a question, the answer that you get is maybe non-existent, maybe exists somewhere else. So if I if I was to go and ask ChatGPT, is there a document organizational structure within compliance function, I'm probably going to get a bunch of results from a lot of websites. So the answer would be yes, but it won't really pertain to my context. There are a couple of ways to tackle that. Some of you may have been in a session yesterday. I found it very interesting. But essentially, one way would be to conduct or do fine-tuning of a model. This is a very expensive process. You require data scientists to conduct that specific tuning process. And not everyone can do this, as there are a lot of steps, not to mention that it's not a very effective way of managing dynamic data. The RAG process, what it allows us to do is to use a pre-trained model, but narrow the context of its generation to the source of the context that you provided it to. In other words, basically the answers are coming now from specifically my document. I don't know, I think this is really small. Let me just try to zoom in a little bit. Are you able to see the answers now? Still not? I think this is going to break the app, but yeah. What about now? Yeah. So just to look at the Gen SPX output for particularly this question, we have, is there a document organizational structure within a compliance function? Yes, no, etc. Right? So the answer that I got, yes, based on the piece of context, provided it appears that there is a compliance committee made up of the board, senior management, and applicable business units within the organizational, indicating a documented organizational structure within the compliance function. It also provided me with a page and a document source where I can find this information. Before we started on this process, I said that this is not a solution. This is a way to enhance the human point or human aspect of the tool. We still have a human element here. We cannot yet fully rely on AI to provide us with answers, especially when it comes to compliance. But what it does do, it allows us to narrow down our answers to specific areas where we can ensure that the answers that we're getting are correct, right? So someone here would potentially go and take a look at this document, ensure that this is truly correct, or maybe I'm not happy with this answer. Maybe I want to know more. In that case, we built a way to provide a sort of an agentic function to it, right? So you can go ahead and requery your answer. So ask it again with more context. Maybe, and I have a couple of prompts here. Let me just grab this one. Include section numbers where the information was used to generate answer. Maybe the page has 6 sections. I still don't know where this information is at. So this is your sort of prompt engineering to a certain degree, right? So you're looking at a way to communicate with the model, but not to a degree where I want the chatbot in a system. It's just a way for me to requery the answer with by providing more context. So I can refetch this specific information. Now I have a lot more. And it does give me essentially a little bit more answer. Still the answer is there. It gives you a context of where this information is found. Compliance committee context includes compliance committee, board, senior management, and it's specific sentences from the actual document. In addition to that, I can also just refetch. So we built a refetch functionality because in some cases, as you can see, I just get a yes. Yes does not tell me much. Refetching the information allows you to create a chaining process. So if I'm not happy with the answer, the previous answer was yes, potentially there is more information that I can get. And now I am getting more answers, but I'm still not getting what I want. This is why the secondary query function was built out so that we could communicate with the model and get what we actually want. As this process goes through, there is sort of a back and forth, right? So in some cases, and this kind of tells you that the model doesn't know because the context does not include this information. Essentially, we'll go through a process of, yes, I'm good with this answer. Maybe I got this from an interview or I got this from the model. I'm good with this answer, etc. Right? And then when I get here, okay, maybe question 5, I need to go back and add it to my workshop list of questions to talk to the client about specifics of that question and try to get more information about it. So as we go through this process, we can start logging observations. We can find some deficiencies in the process. We can log these observations as a deficiency potentially. And when you log these deficiencies, or let's just say that there is, I think I had one here. Okay. The deficiency is logged, and now essentially I'm ready potentially to generate a report or a template for a report. We built a bit of a quick way to kind of generate an output of this. You'd see it as a document with all of your observations logged on the bottom. And everything that has happened, including that secondary query added to the top, just so that we're able to quickly address the specifics of that particular engagement. Any questions at this point on how the tool works, or any questions about the process? Yes?
So I see you can kind of adjust it. Is this a proprietary model that you and your team have developed, or are you augmenting a general model out there?
Yeah, so this is a commercially available model. We have not tuned this model. We've optimized it so that it works for us. It's still going through a process of optimization every day, and we're looking at other ways to further optimize this. I'm not sure if you've heard of the MOA concept, sort of layering of models, essentially. Not to a degree that is currently used in a sense of creating hundreds of layers, but rather looking at cleaning the output by creating, putting a model in the middle, let's just say, that is processing the information, giving you another context, and then the final model is outputting that into a final response. That's still, this is still a concept, so I just wanted to make sure that that's, and it's used internally, right? So we're not, this is not a client tool or anything like this. This is used internally for us to enhance our personal sort of efficiency as it comes to the assessments. Right. So specifically, when we started on this, OpenAI was sort of at the top of the line, and we've started with the 3.5 instruct model as it was a quicker model to look at specifically for something like this, because the processing aspect of this, we're looking for a model where a model can take very specific instructions and output what we need. However, right now we're looking at potentially using other models as well. We're still looking at OpenAI at this point in time, but you've probably heard the Llama model that was just recently released. Apparently is topping the charts in terms of functionality and productivity, as well as the accuracy, I would say, more so than anything else. So we may pivot, but at this time, this is what we're using on this one. Yep. Any other questions on the process here? Okay, so this report that has been generated goes as a template input into essentially a working sheet that someone like an assessor or reporter would take in and process, and then look at gaps and essentially eventually convert into a final report. And that process is very much manual. So this is where the automation stops. We have everything that we need. We're happy with the output. And at this stage, we can go ahead and start conducting our manual process as we would have. The only thing that changes is that the process of gathering information from static files becomes more efficient. We know where to look, we know what to look for, and we don't have to go and read through everything and focus on areas where there is information that we need to process. Once again, I'd like to stop here, and then I'm going to look at or dive into the architecture. There is one component that I did not mention here, and I think those of you who are in fintech or in compliance space probably are curious about the PII, or personal information. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well and how we're handling that piece of things. But please let me know if there are any questions on this specifically. Yes? Yeah, so the human feedback serves as a query. It's not actually a chained intake. So it does not take my query as part of the chain. What it does do is that we do back check on the information that was received previously. And if the information was refetched, that is basically like a feedback back to the model that your information was not correct, refetch. But the query itself, it's a query. So you could think about it as joining your question with an additional context. In addition to that, and I wanted to answer that piece as well, so each engagement is a separate physical container. Our vector stores are completely separated, so there is no chance for data corruption in that regard. And the model processes it as a completely separate set of index. That being said, there are some limitations to this, but considering that we're not looking at an enterprise application with millions of users, these limitations are currently not as of it. Okay, if there are no further questions, I can go ahead and dive into sort of the process and the architecture of this, if that would be good with everyone. Yep. Okay, so let's look at what this model does, essentially. I'll look at the more process-oriented model first, and then we'll look at the actual sort of components of the structure of how this works. So you have your user intake, so user interface, essentially, your data intake comes through. This is where I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the PIA aspect of this. What we're looking at right now is data anonymization. So you are sanitizing your data on the input prior to it hitting your LLM. There are two services included as part of your solution engine. One of them is a content service, which essentially its job is to take your flat files and convert them into vectorized data. That process is handled by another model. They're called embedding models, and those embedding models, they're essentially, their only job is to vectorize your data and make it consumable for the LLM to generate output from. And then you have your model service, which is actually your generation piece that takes that context and provides you with an answer as you're hitting a query against it. So whenever a query is sent out, it pulls the information from your content and provides you with an answer. There are 3 layers of data storage. Your app data, which is your engagement data, that's separate. Your asset data, which is, again, the question repository and all that, that's separate as well. And then your file storage, which is essentially where you have your vectorized data, and it only holds vectorized data. It's not a mixed model in this case, and we're not processing anything but at this moment, PDFs, doc files, Excel files in some cases. So it's very much limited to those types of files. Once you have your output, that output is de-anonymized. And we'll talk about anonymization in a bit here, but essentially it's the output is now readable and consumable for the user. The model output is taken by the user, and from here they basically either go through that feedback loop of requerying the data if they need more information, or they go through a process of creating that reporting template, which is a manual process, and generating your final independent assessment report that is further down sent to the client for review. From process perspective, any questions? No. Okay. Technical side of things, you have 2 components. These are 2 separate components. You have front-end application, and you have your backend. These 2 applications communicate via API. It's internally structured. On the front end, you have your engagement management UI, which is where you create your engagements, all that data related to that. That information comes from the UI, so that data is being sent via API to your backend. It gets sanitized and then goes into your content service. And like I said, behind your content service, you essentially have your file store. From there, the model service handles your query, sends the information back through desanitization process via API back to your front end, which is essentially reflected in your asset management UI, which is the questionnaire that you've seen in the demo. So structurally, this is how the application functions. Any questions about this process? Okay. As I said, I thought there may be questions about data sanitization. I think this is a question on a lot of people's minds. I've spoken with some people here as well that kind of specialize in that field. So currently for data sanitization, there are various options available. Some of them are older than others. Some of you may know Microsoft Presidio is probably one of the older ones, and there are some newer solutions that we've seen here. But the process of how data is sanitized is largely the same. There are 3 stages: identify, validate, anonymize. Identification process, there are 2 methods to identify information. One is regex, so you're looking for patterns in your context. Phone numbers have a pattern, addresses have a pattern, email addresses potentially you could use that for. We don't process credit card information or anything like that, but you could have probably used that for this as well. And then the second portion, which is a lot more interesting, is the named entity recognition. So this is a machine learning model. Again, it's a model that basically recognizes named entities, and it does so by using contextualized prompts. It's a bit of it's a lighter model in general. One of the more common ones, so NER AML that we've seen is the Azure version. Azure AI actually has a fairly interesting NER AML model. And it would recognize things like names, company names, individuals' names, named entities in general. Then we go through a validation. You can perform a checksum. It's optional. And then Context validation is context word validation more so anything else, which is going back and validating that named entity via context words. Context words in a sentence may imply a name or may imply a name of a company, and that's the process that we go through of essentially validating those named entities. Finally, anonymized process, there are many methods. We use a replace method. Replace method replaces your identified PII with a tokenized version of it. Could be a string, could be just a made up word, company A, company B, person A, B, etc. There are other options. However, this we found would be the best option to reverse the process with. So as the information flows into your model, it's anonymized. You get something like company A, something, something. LLM reads it. On the output, we replace these tokens with their original words through that process. It's de-anonymized, and the user gets the actual information that they've inputted through the process of the policy. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Why do you go to the length to anonymize the data like the company name?
Right. Well, because we don't run at the moment, we're still communicating with large-scale LLMs. They're commercialized LLMs. It's not our own model. If you run a model locally, and this is not really you may be aware, but essentially local models, or even if you run them in the cloud as like your personal cloud, this is a very I think resource-intensive, first of all, and secondly expensive process, because you need to have very robust GPU to run these models. I have a MacBook Air here, right? So if I run, say, like a GPT 3.5 on this through Ollama, for example, locally, it would burn my computer. I've tried on a more powerful computer. Takes about 5 to 6 minutes to generate a prompt, and the computer heats up to a degree where I'm getting worried. So you need something that can actually handle this. And if you're running it on a cloud, you would need something with a very robust GPU. If you're using a model where you're communicating with large-scale models through an API, potentially, you want to ensure that you're not providing information to that model that it may potentially use for training. Although a lot of these models do state that you could turn off that functionality, but just to be on the safe side, to ensure that that information does not flow into the large-scale LLM for training purposes, we want to make sure that none of that gets out there. So it's generalized, and we don't know which particular company is having these kinds of policies. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, so there's actually, well, for this specific use case, we use Microsoft Presidio, and it actually has a method for de-anonymizing. So yes, it is stored. Well, for this specific use case, it's a local storage. But yes, the process is you could either store it in local memory on the process output, or you could store it in a database. But that process is largely managed by Presidio in this case. And yes, sorry. No questions? Okay. Okay, great. So once again, thank you very much. I know this was a short presentation. I hope that, wanted to thank again the organizers for having us here. But if there are any further questions about the design process of the model, I'm happy to answer. And yeah, other than that, I think that would be it. Thank you very much.